going over my top 5 curse techniques from Jujutsu Kaisen. Alright, so to kick things off, I want to give an honorable mention to Sukuna's curse technique, Shrine, or whatever you want to call it, right? Since we don't know everything about this still, it didn't feel right to include it, but once we do know everything about this, it's probably going to be in my top 5. But for now, honorable mention. Alright, so coming in at number 5, we've got Yuta Okotsu's copy technique / Rika. For the purposes of this, we're going to assume you get both. And this is pretty self-explanatory, right? Jack of all trades, master of none. You just get a little taste of everything, so this one would be really cool to have. Also, I don't think I mentioned this yet, but these are like the top 5 curse techniques that I personally would like to have. They're not necessarily what I think are the top 5 strongest in the verse, more of like my favorites. Coming in at number 4, we got Jogo with his earth and fire manipulation, and just come on, man, who doesn't want to control fire? And in Jogo's case, he doesn't need a source of it. He can just create it, right? So this is just insanely powerful and just would be really fun, I think. At number 3, we've got Mr. Problematic's Idol Transfiguration. This one's just busted, right? Just the versatility of this one, both offensively and defensively, is insane, right? You got to have special conditions to be able to hurt me in the first place, and I can transform my body into anything. I can fly. Like, there's literally no limits to what you can do with this thing. Not to mention the fact I could heal anyone I want, right? This Mahito could have been the greatest doctor in the universe if he wasn't so batshit, right? So this one would just be an amazing curse technique to have. It's like 10s in every category. Coming in at number 2, we've got Cursed Spirit Manipulation, and come on, man. You're telling me I can have my own menagerie of badass creatures to just have at my beck and call? I can have a dragon that I can fly around on at a moment's notice. This is just so badass. Now, it obviously has its drawbacks. You have to defeat these things before you can subjugate them, and then you have to eat a super disgusting ball, but you know what? I could get past that if I can literally have a dragon to ride around on. This is one of my favorites in the entire show, and I'm actually going to talk about it a little bit more here in a second. And then coming in at number 1, as I'm sure it's no surprise, it is the Limitless, which we're going to assume would come packaged with the 6 eyes in this case, so that it could be properly utilized. And here's what I'll say. I actually like Cursed Spirit Manipulation more, but I can't turn this down. This is just so broken, right? And infinity is like just a concept I've been fascinated with like my entire life. So when I first saw Jujutsu Kaisen and Gojo here started explaining his powers, I was like, what the hell is this really what this man is talking about? So that was one of the moments I fell in love with the show. So I would have to pick this as number 1. And I mean, clearly, the man is the strongest, the honored one, right? So if you're giving me the 6 eyes, we're definitely taking this with the first round draft pick. So shoutouts to In Shibuya for asking what my 5 favorite curse techniques were. Definitely let me know y'all's in the comments, but he also wanted to know what my overall favorite domain expansion was. So there are actually 3 domains that are kind of tied for my favorite. And if you're an anime only, you haven't seen either of these 2 yet, but if I had to give one the edge, it's gonna have to be Higuruma's just because it's so unique. I just really enjoyed the way his works. But again, I won't get into spoilers for my anime onlys here, but probably Higuruma's is my favorite, but Sukuna's is just so badass, right? The open domain, the malevolent shrine, the aesthetic of it is just so cool. And actually, speaking of this fire arrow, I've got another question regarding this. So Bleach Moon wants to know if I think Sukuna imbued his fire arrow into his domain expansion when he was fighting Mahoraga in Shibuya. And here's what I'll say. In the anime, it really kind of makes it seem like that's what's going on because the fire starts taking over everything in the area, right? And then there's like a nuclear explosion, basically. But in the manga, there is still that enormous explosion, but it's just a few panels, so there's not the implication that like everything in the area is getting inflamed prior to that. The explosion seemingly comes from the impact of the arrow with Mahoraga. So from just the manga, I didn't really get this impression, but since the anime kind of leaned that way, it could be what's happening. You know, Gege works hand in hand with the animator, so that could have been like an intentional choice, right? So I don't know. I would still lean maybe that isn't what happened and he was just using the fire arrow and it was spectacle. Because from what we know, and again, Sukuna's curse technique is such a mystery that it could just work that way, right? But from what we know, since he cast the domain and he didn't like recast it, I wouldn't imagine that he could change the parameters to shift from cleave and dismantle to fire arrow just mid-application like that. But maybe he can, depending on the nuance of how his curse technique works. But for my money, he didn't do that. He just simply used the fire arrow while the normal domain expansion was still going on. But it could be the other way. Let me know y'all's thoughts in the comments. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk about cursed spirit manipulation a little bit more, and that's thanks to this question from Shouse, who wants to know if I think 10 Shadows or cursed spirit manipulation is better. And some of you may have been wondering why I didn't include the 10 Shadows in my top 5 favorites. I was considering it, but honestly, when it boiled down to it, I thought these two shared so many similarities that I really only wanted to pick one. Now, clearly they have their differences, but both kind of utilize they're not both Shikigami, but utilize minions to do their bidding, right? And I just felt like her spirit manipulation overall was better. There's so much more versatility. There aren't limits. Up here you've only got 10. You could literally have millions theoretically with cursed spirit manipulation and supremely powerful ones as well, right? Like imagine if Geto had actually gotten Rika. There's really no limit. You can be as strong as the cursed spirit you can capture. Now, obviously you do have to still defeat them and subjugate them, but the same is true of 10 Shadows, and with 10 Shadows, you have to do it by yourself. You could go out with a whole squad to help you take down a cursed spirit and then ultimately consume it. So I just like the increased versatility of this, the increased numbers of this. But I will say that ultimately, Maharaga is probably the pinnacle. Like I would assume Maharaga is greater than almost any cursed spirit imaginable. I think Maharaga beats Rika, for example, in a vacuum, like if Okotsu's not there. Well, it's tough. But anyway, I would say Maharaga probably is stronger than any singular thing from cursed spirit manipulation. But overall, with cursed spirit manipulation, I think its ceiling is higher than 10 Shadows' ceiling, if that makes sense, in the right hands, right? So ultimately, I gotta go with cursed spirit manipulation, but, no disrespect to 10 Shadows. And y'all, I'm going to include a few more anime-friendly questions in this video. The first one is from Black here, who wants to know, what happens if you explain your curse technique to an opponent in another language? So this is referring to the binding vow revealing one's hand, which we learn about in the show. And I've got a video on it for anybody that needs like the full breakdown. But essentially what that is if you explain your curse technique to somebody, you get a power boost, right? So would that still work if you explained it in another language? And no, in my opinion, this wouldn't work because the whole way that binding vow operates is because you're giving your opponent an advantage. And if they don't understand what you're saying, you're not giving them an advantage, right? So it's kind of like a loophole that wouldn't really matter because it's not doing the thing that the binding vow is structured around. So unless your opponent also spoke that other language, then no, I don't think this would work and you would not get the power boost. And finally, we got this question from Giovanni on what would happen if Gojo was sent to a new universe. Would the Jujutsu Kaisen universe be able to manifest a new user of the Six Eyes? So for anyone that isn't aware of this lore surrounding Six Eyes users, there can only be one at a time. So no two Six Eyes users can exist at the same time. And this is important because this is one of the reasons Gojo was sealed away in the prison realm instead of just being taken out. Because if he was taken out, then another Six Eyes user could manifest, and that would cause problems for the bad guys, right? So you seal him away in the prison realm, and you're good. Don't have to deal with any Six Eyes users. So because of that precedent established in the universe, I would assume that the same would be true for here. Even if you poof Gojo to another universe, another dimension, I don't think you could get a new Six Eyes in the JJK verse because Gojo technically still exists somewhere out there. The fact that he's in the prison realm could almost be considered like a different dimension, maybe not a different universe, but it's still held true, right? Even though Gojo was there, no new Six Eyes could happen in the real world. So similarly, I feel like you put Gojo in the multiverse, no new Six Eyes can happen until he passes away in that other multiverse. But obviously this would be open to interpretation. Where is the line drawn in terms of like the all-knowing presence in JJK? Like when would it consider the Six Eyes to be truly gone even if Gojo wasn't dead? So your guess is as good as mine, but I think no new Six Eyes would happen until Gojo passed away. That's it for this one, y'all. Thank you if you made it this far, and thank you guys so much for the support. And please let me know y'all's favorite curse techniques in the comments. I want to hear them.